News in less than 12 hours, the US will reimpose economic sanctions on Iran. All measures lifted under the 2015 nuclear deal are coming back, despite Tehran's compliance with the agreement. It is a move that has triggered anger in Iran, as JD'ASYFK reports.
Any common ground there may have been between Iran and America seems to have been lost. At a rally to mark the 39th anniversary of the takeover of the U.S. Embassy, Iranians expressed their anger and frustration at a country they blame for their continued economic isolation. There was also the familiar contempt that has come to define Iran's relationship with the United States. The country's top soldiers said economic warfare, America's last attempt to defeat Iran, is not going to work, and warned U.S. President Donald Trump not to try anything else.
I
want to say something to America and its weird president. Never threaten Iran, because we can still hear the horrified cries of your soldiers in the desert. And you know better, every day, how many of your old soldiers in America commit suicide due to depression and fear that they suffered in battlefields. So don't threaten us militarily, and don't frighten us with military threats.
U.S. sanctions meant to punish Iran have devastated the country's economy in the last year. Trump has said it's going to get worse, but Iranians at this rally seemed more angry than afraid.
One difference between old sanctions and new ones is that this time these protesters are not alone in condemning the United States. In the past, Iran had a weaker economy when it was hit by international sanctions mandated by the United Nations. Now this time, Iran has a lot more support from world leaders, has a relatively stronger economy, and is only facing what many Iranians are calling Trump's sanctions.
Once a symbol of American influence in the region, the old embassy in the heart of the capital is now little more than a relic, left standing only as a reminder for Iranians to remain vigilant.
My message to America is that many of their previous presidents also threatened us a lot and announced their options on the table. But nothing happened. As our supreme leader said, we are seeing signs of America's decline.
Friendship with America is impossible. It's like a friendship between a sheep and a wolf.
I'm telling you, even in the era of the Shah, America was our enemy. The Shah didn't realize it. An enemy is always an enemy. America never compromises with Iran, and Iran will also never bow down to it.
Diplomats and negotiators spent years paving the way for the 2015 nuclear deal. After Trump came to power, the goodwill they'd built crumbled in a matter of months. It even earned him his own sideshow at this year's rally. Whether Iran chooses to remain committed to the nuclear deal or not, the next American president may not be able to fix what Donald Trump has broken. JD'ASYFK, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Well, successive US presidents have used sanctions to try to contain Iran, ever since the Western-backed Shah was overthrown back in 1979. First, you have Jimmy Carter, who banned Iranian imports and froze assets worth billions of dollars over the hostage-taking at the embassy in Tehran. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan designated the country a state sponsor of terrorism after 241 Marines were killed in Beirut. He blamed Iran for funding the group behind that attack. Then in the 1990s, Bill Clinton banned all US companies from doing business in Iran. The first significant measures against related to its nuclear program came under George W. Bush. And then in 2010, Barack Obama signed into law new sanctions, describing them as the toughest ever passed by Congress. A breakthrough, though, was finally reached in 2015, of course, with the nuclear deal. It was agreed by the US and Iran and European powers and China and Russia. It saw sanctions lifted in exchange for inspections and Iranian nuclear policy changes. But earlier this year, as we know, Donald Trump withdrew from that agreement, announcing his intention to reimpose US sanctions. Other signatories are sticking to it, and they're being closely watched now for what they will do next. Our diplomatic editor James Bays has more on that from the United Nations.
This is being described by the Trump administration as the toughest sanctions regime ever imposed on Iran. The country's oil exports are being targeted, although 8 countries have been given temporary waivers to allow them to still import Iranian oil for the time being. The administration is now reintroducing all of the sanctions that were frozen under the Iran nuclear deal in 2015.
The Iranian economy is in a bad place. There's no question about that. Inflation is high, unemployment is high, and the currency is depreciated significantly. But I think it's worth noting that these are not historical anomalies for the Iranian government. They've been dealing since the revolution with high inflation.
The Trump administration's campaign against Iran is both political and economic. On the economic track, Iran's already hurting, and these sanctions will make it even worse. Politically, things are much more complicated. The aim of the administration is to punish and isolate Iran, but that isn't working. When President Trump chaired the UN Security Council in September, the other countries, including the US's closest allies, spoke up in favor of the Iran nuclear deal. China, an importer of Iranian oil, currently holds the Security Council presidency. Its ambassador had this answer when I asked him if the latest sanctions were illegal.
We oppose the unilateral sanctions against any country in the world.
The White House is hoping the new sanctions will send a tough message to Iran, but experts believe Tehran's calculations will actually depend more on what happens on Tuesday night. Based on how the Republicans fare in the midterm elections, Iran will be determining, despite the hardship, whether they can wait President Trump out. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the United Nations.
Spoke to Hilary Mann-Leverett earlier, former White House national security official, now CEO of Strategia, a political risk consultancy group, who told us Trump wants to undo the policies that were put in place by his predecessor, Barack Obama.
The Trump administration is doing this deliberately in order to, in a sense, put strain on the U.S. relationship with its allies. The United States does not want to be part of a multilateral deal. It has no interest in keeping President Obama's legacy. So that's very much something that is motivating the White House here, is to break apart this multilateral deal negotiated by Trump's predecessor, President Obama, and to put Iran in a position where it is in severe pain and it is forced to deal with the Trump administration on its own, by itself, in a bilateral arrangement.
Here's what we've got coming up for you on this news hour. As the leader of one of Mexico's most dangerous cartels awaits trial in the US, we look at why El Chapo's business is still thriving. We're in Russia, where church bell ringing is moving into the modern age. And Juventus run away with a 6-point lead in Italy. The details coming up in sport with Leah.